Welcome back, everyone, to track 2. My name is John Hurdisky, your track chair for this session. And welcome to DAM, the source of creative truth with Kimberly-Clark. If you are looking for a day in the life of a DAM specialist with Balsam Brands, that's track 1. So that's scroll to the top of the agenda and click that. But we are in track 2. And we're going to listen to Venkatesh Kidambi from Kimberly-Clark. As always, make sure to look on if you want to ask questions, go to this the right-hand side of the screen and ask questions. I will be monitoring the questions, and when we have the Q&A, I will be asking those to Venkatesh. So over to you.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much. Hi, people. Hi, folks. People have joined the session. Today, I am going to present slightly of the beaten track of the perspectives of you might possibly have heard about digital asset management. This is not a brief of what we have done immediately in the past, or what we might be doing immediately. But this is a thought process that we are looking at in terms of building overall digital asset management capabilities. What should it be? What should it do? And how can we possibly redefine some of the thinking that we have had as practitioners of digital asset management and as practitioners of digital marketing overall. So next few slides are going to be a source of my research, my own experience, and some of the perspectives that I'm going to present today. The agenda, as you can see, is how are we looking at cost of content creation? Is it becoming a barrier to the consumer experience? Digital assets, how are they journeying from being a creative or a content to being an asset? How to get more of your digital assets and how to measure return on your assets. This possibly is what the story is going to be about in terms of our perspective of digital asset management. Let's look at the marketer's speak first. I mean, some of the things which I basically did when I basically was looking at various sources of research for this presentation. What emerged as the least common divider for most of them is that most of them are looking at creative and content costs being a significant part of their marketing budget. Cost of content creation becoming unaffordable, because each time we come up with a creative, each time we come up with a new piece of content, we are looking to do something new. It's basically becoming unaffordable to keep doing the new content pieces again and again. And the issues with getting optimal out of the content is basically a recurring theme across many of the research papers and research streams that I have seen on both Forrester as well as others. This being a problem statement and problem sets that we basically take to a digital asset management as a practice and expectations that we have out of digital asset management as a technology. Let's look at what are the real problems which basically come out of these expectations. So content may be the king, but it actually is costing a king's ransom to create. And cost of content creation is holding the consumer experience hostage, because each time we come up with a new content for experience, we basically are expending that ever so little amount of marketing budget that is decreasing each year is what marketers are telling us. So it makes it imperative that the entire digital life cycle or the asset life cycle is effectively managed. But what does that mean? So we have data, we have all these expectations, we have all these objectives that we have. But what is effectively managing the digital asset life cycle? I possibly want to present a slightly different perspective here. Is it an asset or is it a liability? Feel free to comment do comment on the this in the comment section. John can feed this feedback to me. What do you think your digital assets are? Are they assets or are they liabilities? Many marketers would like to say they are assets. They are possibly creating a lot of returns for me, but can we realistically measure them? And can we realistically call a digital asset an asset? Is what I'm going to explore in the next few slides. We have to first realize that every creative or every piece of content actually starts its life as a liability. It costs money to create, it costs to maintain, it costs money to promote, publish, it costs money to basically its every existence is actually costing time, money, and effort. So that being the case, is it an asset or is it a liability? So when it starts off its life, it's definitely a liability. Unless the creative or content is monetized, it's a liability. So with that as a premise, let's look at the next few slides of how do we go about, measuring this. So can we have an asset ledger similarly like a stockbroker would have, or a financial asset management organizations would have, or any of these equity and mutual funds would have? They have an assets that basically have credits and debits. And in our case, possibly a creative or a content piece is expected to generate leads and sales, and it's possibly expected to cost something. It's cost of creation, cost of maintenance, cost of publishing, and so on. So can we actually look at a perspective where we are looking at these digital creatives that we have as some things which actually produce returns and results, and that is what is the management of these digital assets would actually add value to as our organizations. So digital asset management is more importantly a practice of converting liabilities to assets. So it is not just about managing the life cycle. It's not just about saying that, hey, I have a huge catalog of assets that I have, I can do a lot of things. But are we actually monetizing them? It's converting liabilities into assets. Is that what we should be doing? Is some of the questions that I wanted to ask as a perspective to digital asset management. Should we actually be looking at each one of these assets? How do they basically be value can be attributed? So how can we? So what would make it an asset? An asset has a unique identity and identification mechanism. So say you have a house, you have a basic naming convention, a house number, a street, a place where it can be found. And it has a measurable value and value creation through its life cycle. An asset appreciates, depreciates through its life cycle, and there is a point where it's no longer profitable. So you basically have to retire the asset. An asset creates measurable return on investment. So in order to basically look at the value that any of these digital assets are basically creating to us, it is imperative that we measure the return on investment. So against each asset, it's not only just enough that we catalog them, we manage them, we have a repository of this content that is there that can be easily shared across. But it is imperative that we basically look at how do we measure the return on investment. So some kind of value attribution examples I just wanted to give in case, say, we will wish to look at how are we actually measuring the assets. So say a creative could be a campaign theme that we got, something that can be adapted into an email or a social post, a landing page. And each one of these would have their own measurable set of KPIs: open rate, CTR, attributable leads, sales. If it's a social post, it's interactions, earned media. If it's a landing page, it's some time spent, leads, and attributable sales. So if you were to attribute all of these things to the creative and have a way in which we are tracking these KPIs and come up with a value that we basically can get down to an asset ledger, we have a way in which we can then measure our return on every single piece of creative that we have. So asset valuation and asset value attribution is something that we should be looking at more in terms of how a banker would look at the assets and liabilities that they have accumulated on their ledger. So right purpose, the content. So we create a lot of content, but many times I basically end up asking myself, is this content actually, which phase of the consumer journey is this content belonging to? Now, can it be repurposed and reused? Definitely becomes interesting only when, or even relevant only when it's actually in the same phase of the content. So have a purpose behind what these content pieces and what these creative pieces are doing for us. Now we have all about metadata perspective that we heard a little earlier today. But metadata is also with respect to creative and content is actually about how this creative and content has a purpose. Now, an asset definitely needs to have purpose, and reuse and returns would definitely be determined purely by the way in which we are purposing the content and how it's placing a key role in delivering a consumer experience. A calculator in the solve stage of a consumer journey, or a testimonial in the compare phase of a consumer journey, and offers and vouchers could be in the purchase phase of the consumer journey. So the consumer journey then dictates what classes of assets that we basically create. So we have asset classes, we have asset valuation that we have, and we have asset KPIs. So that we came out of all of these things. So a DAM should possibly help us basis all of these premises that I have created so far. A DAM not only just is a catalog of all the content that I have and helps me share the content across all the systems. It's easy to basically pull it and integrate with various websites, consumer experiences. It's very important for me to basically, as a digital asset management professional, to look at what kind of KPIs that I have: impressions, clicks, interactions, time spent, earned media, virality, reuse, and have all of these KPIs into a system which essentially allows us to track what is my asset or a creative ledger. So for example, an audio visual that we have created could basically have a cost of creation, say about $20,000 at this point in time. An example of cost of maintenance in terms of technology, people, process would possibly, let's attribute that to around $200. And cost of publishing, distributing this content and ensuring the content reaches the right places is possibly the biggest cost. The media that we're going to spend on the content, it possibly costs around, say, 100K. Now, the credit phase of what we have is that we have leads valued at $200,000 and sales valued at $50,000. So at this stage, the asset is a loss-making asset, even though the leads and sales look really big. The asset is actually costed us more than what is actually brought to the table. So one of the key practices that we basically as digital asset management professionals should look at, in my opinion, is how do we convert these kinds of liabilities into assets by making them more profitable. So we could have a segmentation of our creative and content. Usually we look at consumer segmentations and customer segments, but for a change, in my perspective, we should also be looking at how we segment our creative and content. So can we have content which is high return, low cost, and we can have content which is definitely low return and high cost. So each one of these quadrants would essentially help us in terms of looking at how our content is adding value to our organizations, and how possibly some of this content is not actually adding value to the organizations. How do we then learn from this and then possibly create more and more high impact content, which are actually profitable assets? And how do we minimize the low return assets is possibly the game that digital asset management would then become. So to close the presentation, the theme of the entire deck, or the entire premise and the perspective that I propose, is that one has to look at the digital asset management as a source of creative truth, a solution that creates 360-degree view of digital assets through digital asset lifecycle, facilitates, not just provides that 360 view, but also facilitates monetization of creative and content. So unless until your digital asset manager or management as a practice is about looking at how do we monetize the creative and content and conversion of liabilities to assets, we are still looking at, say, loss making and a liability management practice than an asset management practice. With that, I close the presentation. I'm through. I'm sure there'll be some questions or their perspectives. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Venkatesh. That was an excellent presentation. I loved a few good quotes. I loved how you said that content may be king, but a king's ransom to create. And this is true. It's expensive to create content, isn't it?
Yep, very expensive. In fact, in my experience, it is costed, say, if a campaign were to have a $100,000 budget, a good 20-25% of it actually goes to the content today. So at that cost, it better do something.
And people sometimes forget the fact that that content does cost money to create, and it's all part of a cycle to consider. And one of the questions I received was, they mentioned how you said that an asset creates measurable ROI. And I know ROI is sometimes discussed at the Henry Stewart events. What type of ROI or otherwise known as return on investment. What type of ROI analysis are you doing at Kimberly-Clark?
So we have ROI analysis at tactic level at this point in time. We basically look at what each tactic is bringing us in terms of the consumer. But then since we are a B2C organization, wherein most of our sales actually happen through retailers, and a very small percentage of our overall sales is actually through e-commerce. So we are currently looking at, say, a different way of attribution. That's one of the biggest challenges that we have today. So some of our teams are actually currently working on actually measuring what does each click or what does each minute spent on our website actually add to our bottom lines and actually adding to our top lines. And an indirect attribution methodology, what I'm basically presented today was a more direct attribution methodology. But if you could also do an indirect attribution, so what is each of our clicks on a website actually adding to sales of a product like Huggies? Or what is a minute of two or spent on a blog actually adding to the sales of Kotex or Kleenex or Cottonelle? These are consumer brands. This is something that we are still in the process of doing it, and they are actually trying to come to a dollar figure, a dollar number to each one of these. Once we are through that phase, then we possibly would like to build a more mature and more robust management practice where we are looking at measurable return on investment for every content and every creative that we create.
Mm-hmm. And ROI is something I think that we need to talk more often about, because it's such a valuable part of the exercise of working with your executive team and sort of validating what the DAM is trying to do. So I always love when I hear people beginning to champion a good ROI analysis. So thank you for putting that into the presentation. Another question I got here for you, Venkatesh, was you on one of your slides, you mentioned KPIs, or otherwise known as a key performance indicator. And I'm a big fan of reporting and metrics and analysis. One of the questions that came in was, do you have any valuable KPIs that you may want to share with the audience today?
One of the key KPIs that I possibly was measuring some time ago in one of the DAM practices I managed was the number of, say, validated lead revenue count, as we call it, VLRC. So with this B2B business, wherein we were looking at number of leads a particular white paper gotten, or a number of leads YouTube video gotten. And so we could actually attribute the number of leads that actually came to that. And once it goes into the sales funnel, we were able to qualify the size of the lead. So you have a particular value that could be attributed to the lead. And then once that is there, we basically would possibly be able to align enough people in the organization to basically go after that lead. And then you would have various conversion and success metrics then assigned to it. So hence you would know at each sales stage, what is the amount of value that particular lead got. So hence if you attribute it back to the white paper or say opinion of our SME or even possibly a video or testimonial of a client actually gotten, we would be very surprised to find that some of these assets had very real high value. As much as I today presented a liability perspective, some of the white papers and scientifically created creatives actually got in 80% of our revenues. So the 80-20 Pareto principle actually applies.
Did you say 80, like 80%, 80%?
Yes.
Wow.
It's being a B2B business, you have a buying center to make a decision, which would possibly make a highly informed decision than possibly a consumer who would make an impulsive decision. So it's a very different way of looking at content.
Another question came in for you, Venkatesh. Are GLAMs an atypical and challenging space to value or valuation measures models on profitability basis alone?
It depends on your business model. A B2B2C or indirect business model will be slightly more different as a challenge for someone like Kimberly-Clark. We are still working on it. But a e-commerce business or a B2B business or possibly anywhere you have direct attribution model that could be applied. I believe digital assets should be purely measured on their amount of return on investment, what kind of ROI that it is attributable to. If you do not have an attribution model, you could create one as long as your targets of why you're creating an asset becomes very clear. The purpose of the asset becomes very clear.
And I think if any takeaways from this presentation is, I would love for people to start thinking a little bit more about ROI, return on investment, and KPIs and what they do, and build that into the management of their dams. They're always, like you say, assets or liability. Are you evaluating what your dam is doing? So excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Venkatesh. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much.